Ladies and gentlemen, very welcome. I hope you see and hear me very well. Welcome at this ZEUS closing web conference. I'm still doubting how to pronounce ZEUS. ZEUS, ZEUS, something like that, but you know what I mean. I'm going to try to make you feel as welcome as possible, and I used Google for that, so if it's not okay, you can blame Google. Het warmt welkomnande Stockholm. Seems very Swedish to me. Ein herzliches Willkommen München. Una caloroso benvinguda Barcelona. Tulemasti esti. Bienvenue pour les gens qui parlent français. En welkom aan de Belgische deelnemers. There might be some languages that seem too difficult for me, so I'm going to skip those ones. But in English, also very welcome, happy you are here. My name is Koen. I'll guide you through today's session. I would like to start with a little bit of practical, technical information. The best way to follow this session is when you mute yourself. You can put on your camera. Always nice for us to see you. People who will be presenting can put their camera on as well. So that makes it, new way of doing events. And although this is a virtual event, we would like to invite you to ask your questions using the chat button you will find below your screen. And you can send those questions to me. My name today in this session is Colruyt Group, Koen Baert. I know Koen Baert is a very Flemish name. So Colruyt Group, Koen Baert. That's the person you can send the questions to. At the end of all the presentations, I will ask those questions to different people who have done the presentations. Let me check what else I have to tell you. If there would be a technical problem, just hold on, wait a few minutes, and our technical crew will solve this in a few seconds. So normally there will be no problem. We've done this before. Let's touch wood. It will not be any problem. So if there is a technical problem, just wait and see what happens. We will solve it in a few seconds. Let me conclude by saying how wonderful it is that you are present here today. And finally, I am very happy to pass the floor to Jonas Haustraete, who is quite eager to welcome you personally as well. Jonas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Koen, for the nice introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jonas Haustraete. I work for Colruyt Group, or DOTS24, the Department of Energy and Mobility of Colruyt Group. And I will talk a bit about the ZEUS project, or the Zero Emission Off-Peak Urban Deliveries project, a project we worked on with 11 partners, supported by the EIT, or the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, and more precisely EIT Urban Mobility, who addresses the main challenges that the big cities encounter today. In the next slides, I will talk about how the project started, but also about the different work packages. Of course, the next speakers, will talk about the more detailed version of the work packages. So, zero emission off-peak urban deliveries. One of the biggest problems that the cities encounter today are related with the daytime deliveries. Daytime deliveries causes a lot of problems with emission, for example, not only the tailpipe emissions, like greenhouse gases or nitrogen oxides, but also noise emission. Noise emission is really a big problem for the cities. Imagine sleeping next to a store or above a loading area or next to a loading-unloading area. It really makes a lot of noise, all the operational activities. But not only those emissions, also the congestion is really a problem, traffic jam. All the urban stakeholders will have effects on those congestion. The commuters, retailers, citizens, the neighbors living close to the streets, and not only for the extra driving time, but also for the safety aspect. And we think in the ZEUS project, we can already solve a lot of these problems. We can solve those problems by shifting daytime deliveries to off-peak deliveries. And those off-peak deliveries, of course, can only be executed with one condition, that we can do it silently, very silently. And that's why we introduced the battery electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, trucks, to do the off-peak deliveries. With those trucks, we ensure that we can do it without emission, no tailpipe emission, but also no noise emission. And of course, driving from the warehouse to the city is one thing, but we also have the operational activities at the shop, the loading and unloading activities. And in our project, we also found a solution to do that silently. So that's why our project is called the ZEUS project, or zero emission, so no emissions, no tailpipe, no noise emission, for a cleaner environment, for more livable spaces for the urban citizens. Of course, in the city, so urban. We talk about the big cities because they today encounter the biggest problems with the daytime deliveries. And we solve those issues by delivering off-peak from daytime to nighttime, and of course only for the big deliveries. We don't talk about the parcels you get at home every day, especially these days, but we talk about deliveries to the big supermarkets, to the big stores. Because as you know, the necessity of freight will become bigger and bigger as the city grows. So the problem will be bigger in the next coming years. As I said before, we do this with 11 partners. The scope of the project is really big, so we need all of those partners. In the first column, you can see the industry partners, the trading group. The members are Scania and MAN. They deliver, of course, the plug-in hybrid and the battery electric trucks for our project. Then we have Colruyt Group. They have a lot of experience in daytime deliveries, nighttime deliveries. The city is very important as a living lab where we can execute our tests of the project. And then, of course, we have the universities and the knowledge institutes, very important to analyze our results. Because, of course, in the project, we wanted to have a solution for the daytime deliveries. But we also need proof if we want to shift from daytime deliveries to nighttime deliveries. And the universities and the knowledge institutes, they selected all the models and tools needed for the data we collected during the tests. And those models are fine-tuned, configured by all those partners. And once we have selected all models for example, know the emissions of noise, to know the feedback of the stakeholders, like all the citizens. Once we had all those tools, we were able to execute those tests. And we did two kinds of field tests because we identified two main use cases with city deliveries. One of the use cases is driving and maneuvering in the city. That's just a truck who departs at the warehouse and is driving to the store. And the second use case we identified is the silent loading and unloading at the store. And at both of those use cases, we executed a lot of tests. The first one in Stockholm and Munich, the second one in Brussels. For both tests, we collected data, sound measurements on the vehicle, on the terminal, at the stores, but also other data like GPS data to know the traffic conditions and other city-related data. Because the more data we had, the easier it was to convince at the end the urban stakeholders that off-peak delivery is useful. And of course, for the silent loading and unloading activities, it was not possible with the materials that we use today. So we introduced some new materials and new processes to be able to deliver silently. And at the end of these tests, we collected enough data to put in all our models and tools, and all our universities were able to analyze those data and to evaluate the data. And at the end, of course, we had some results. And those results we want to share with everybody who is interested in those results. We want to share them with all urban stakeholders. But more information about all of these models and tools and tests are in the next slides by the next speakers. So I would like to give the floor to Koen again.
Thank you very much, Jonas, for this short introduction. Next, we're moving to Sweden, where Mr. Billsjö, mobility expert of the city of Stockholm, will enlighten us with the city's perspective on this whole story, thereby also representing Munich and Barcelona. Mr. Billsjö, I saw you have a beautiful background ready already. I hope the sound and the image will be okay. So let's go to Sweden right now. Mr. Billsjö, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And as you heard, my name is Robin Billsjö, and today I will present the city's perspective in this project. And as you heard, the other two cities involved are Munich and Barcelona. We can go to the next slide. All of these three cities have in common that they are quite large cities that are growing in growing regions, and this of course comes with a lot of challenges. As most parts of society, we have the climate change, of course, as an overall challenge. In the city of Stockholm, we have set a goal to have the organization fossil fuel free already by 2030, and to have all the transport and activities going on within the city fossil fuel free by 2040. So this is of course a huge overall challenge. Then we have the local emissions creating problems with air quality. We have noise. The growing city has to handle an increasing part of congestion, of course. We also have to see to all our inhabitants and residents and people moving around in the city and focus on issues related to safety and security availability in the city. And if we move to the next slide, this can be summarized for the transport department where I work within the city to achieve an accessible and functioning city 24 hours a day and every day of the year, basically. This is the big challenge we have to work with. And the transport department is responsible for all streets, squares, and parks within the city. So all the public space, so to speak. Next slide. Yes. And as Stockholm is, like also Munich and Barcelona, it's quite old cities with an existing street network in the biggest part of the city, and this means that we have a limited space. In the green image here, you can see an image of what the street would look like if we gave the requested space for every mode of transport and every activity in the street. This would create a street that is 50 meters wide. But in the reality, not many streets are that wide. You see in the lower blue image an example of one of the larger main streets of central Stockholm, which is less than half of that, 23 meters. So of course, since we cannot give the requested space to every group, we have to be innovative, and we have to prioritize so that different groups get their priority in different areas of the city. Next slide, please. At the same time, we are facing a global trend where we have an increasing focus on the streets, to look at the streets as not only links for movement of cars, but they are actually part of the public space in our cities. Those are places where people meet and where we want them to stay and to create meetings and social activities. In Stockholm, this is a picture of our summer pedestrian streets, which is an initiative that has been increased for every year and is very popular. It means that during 3 or 4 months in the summer, we remove all the car parking on a few residential streets, and we allow for restaurant terraces, for other activities. And you can see a similar activity throughout the world with in large cities like New York and London. You see how they create new areas. In Barcelona, they're working with the super block strategy to find a place for other activities on the local residential streets. So this is also something we have to take into account when the city is growing. And of course, all of these activities that we see here, like restaurants and stores, etc., they also generate transport demand. So we need to have goods being delivered and waste being transported out every day, which is of course also a challenge in an environment like this. Next slide, please. In the city of Stockholm, we have raised the importance of freight and created a Stockholm freight plan, which is our platform in working with freight-related issues. It has been adopted by the city council, which means that it's the freight plan for all of the city of Stockholm, and it basically sets out the direction to work with these issues. I mean, we have to secure the availability and accessibility for freight, but at the same time reduce the negative impacts. And we have to do this in close collaboration with different stakeholders, which is why we participate in such a project as the ZEUS project. And also the freight plan in itself was developed in close collaboration with industry stakeholders. Next slide, please. So focusing a little bit more on the issues in this project, using the off-peak, from our perspective, we have a very uneven use of the road infrastructure today in the city. The image to the right is a central artery in the central Stockholm going from north to south, and this is a typical image from the rush hour traffic. You can see in the diagram the typical traffic flow distribution over the day, and you can see a very clear morning and often rush hour, and also during the daytime it's quite high. But during the night, evening, and early mornings, we have a lot of space in the system that is not being used. So if we can find solutions to move part of the traffic from the peak to the off-peak, that is a very efficient way of using the existing infrastructure in our city. Next slide, please. As you can see here in this image, this is the exact same location during the night. So it's a clear benefit to use the infrastructure at that time. And of course, as we've seen in projects and why we're working with this, is that we can achieve less congestion during the daytime, which means less emissions, both for the daytime traffic and the nighttime traffic. Improved road safety, if we can have less lorries moving around in the morning rush hour when we have a lot of pedestrians bicycling to work, that's of course a very good thing. And also this allows for us to work for our overall goal to achieve a more attractive city. It's a very good thing if we can secure the transport availability and the transport of goods, but at the same time remove the visible appearance of the trucks for people moving around in the city. Next slide, please. But of course, we have several challenges connected to this to off-peak deliveries, which you will hear more about in the following presentations. And perhaps the biggest one is the noise challenge, which is a little bit different in the different countries, but most countries have some sort of noise regulation to secure a good environment for residents in the city. And in the Stockholm case, we have a very mixed usage of housing in the central city. So we have a lot of areas with commercial activities on the ground floor, and then we have apartments on top, which means that we have residents that for whom we need to secure their night's sleep, of course. And we have national noise restrictions that we need to follow within the city. So we have to be very careful to develop silent enough solutions. From our perspective, also, since we do have a ban today, so we're working with specific permits for night deliveries, and we need to adapt our regulations in Stockholm, and we need to find exactly what criteria should be included to allow night deliveries, and how such a system could be put in place, so we can also follow up and secure the compliance of the rules that we have set. And yeah, of course, the local infrastructure and where you are in the city and street design, etc., are also important questions. And that is why we need to work in close collaboration with all the stakeholders, such as in this project, to learn together how to move forward. And I believe that is all I had. I think so. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Billsjö, and please stay with us because I'm sure at the end of the presentations we'll come back to you with some questions that have entered already. I feel a little bit like I'm presenting the Eurovision Song Contest, going from one presentation to another one. The only difference is we don't give points today. Next up is Mr. Magnus Blinge, research manager at Scania. He will share with us many interesting viewpoints on the value of electrical trucks and the tests they have been performing. Mr. Blinge, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Magnus Blinge. I work at Scania, and I will do this presentation. We have this together with Christoph Jasperger, our colleague at MAN. MAN and Scania is a part of the Trajan company owned by the Volkswagen Group. Together with Volkswagen Caminos and Omnibus, we sell and deliver about 240,000 trucks and buses per year. So we are quite a big global player in this field. And perhaps we can show a small movie while I'm talking about this concept of silent delivery in a zero-emission age. Both MAN and Scania is, of course, heavily involved in this shift towards sustainability and towards sustainable transport solution. And we at Scania were a little late and launched our battery electric vehicle this summer, but MAN delivered their battery electric vehicle ETGM to their customers already in October last year. So it has been tested for a while. And in these pilots that we have done, we have tested, MAN has delivered. It was tested in Munich, and Scania brought in a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle in Stockholm. And a plug-in hybrid, for those who don't heard about that, it's a combination of a smaller battery pack with the internal combustion engine. And I will come back to the plug-in hybrid in Stockholm later on. But this MAN vehicle, it can go 200 kilometers in the range, and it takes about 60 minutes to charge in a 150 kilowatt charger. The test was made in Munich, in a city, in a simulated route for a couple of weeks in November this year. We measured noise, and it was performed in 3 routes in the early morning, at 6 a.m. and at 10 a.m. And then also in 3 routes in the evening from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And you can see the summary of what I've been talking about in this slide. about the Munich case. And with that, I think that we can go to the next little movie about the plug-in hybrid in Stockholm. The pilot in Stockholm with a plug-in hybrid it's a quite small battery. This was the first prototype that Scania delivered in 1917 or 1918. It has a very small battery. It can only go 10 kilometers on electric, but it, on the other hand, is quite easy to charge, 15 to 20 minutes. It is delivered to our logistic company, to the logistic company Harvey, who delivered in this test to 5 different McDonald's restaurants in Stockholm city. The plug-in hybrid is equipped with a geofencing device. That means that the vehicle knows when it enters a specific zone, and then the electric drive automatically kicks in. So this device can also be used, for example, in cities where you need speed control or in emission zones and stuff. And Harvey combined this with biofuel, the HVO, to reduce the CO2 significantly. The tests in Stockholm were performed from October 19th to November 19th to 5 restaurants. Unfortunately, the COVID hit again in November, so 3 of the restaurants that McDonald's had closed for the evenings. So from now on, from 19th of November until now, there is only 2 restaurants that is delivered off peak, but we're still doing the test and we're still collecting data for this. The test was made twice a week, and there were 3 routes per night, one at 10 p.m., one at 8 p.m., and one at 5 a.m. Sorry, 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Now, as the battery in this first hybrid vehicle is limited to 10 kilometers range, Harvey needed a charging station that has been placed at one of the restaurants, and they also have, of course, charging at the terminal. That perhaps summarize the Stockholm test. So we can go to the next slide, please. Measurement devices. The presentation from KTH would be much more detailed on this, but we equipped the vehicles with microphones to measure the sound, both on the vehicle at the rear and for getting traffic noise, etc., but also at the restaurant and also at the terminal to see the full-scale picture. Now, if we take some preliminary results from our test, I would say, although this first generation of plug-in hybrid only have a very small battery of 10, that can take 10 kilometers. This summer, Scania launched the series production of plug-in hybrid vehicles that goes with 40 kilometers, but unfortunately, it hasn't been delivered this year. But the results are quite interesting, especially when it comes to the transport efficiency for the logistic company. We could see that it has about 30% lower delivery time, and that is confirmed from other tests that has been done in off-peak situations. So the efficiency is better, about 30%, and it's better punctuality. So the receiver knows more exactly when they get the goods. The fuel consumption in this plug-in hybrid is 45% less. The route that Harvey takes is the Harvey terminal is about 30 kilometers from the city center. So each route is about 45-50 kilometers approximately, and with this extra charging possibilities, we can have a lower fuel reduction as high as 45%. And of course, with the next generation, that will be even better. Other insights from the tests show that the drivers of these vehicles, they are much less stressed. They like this night delivery situation because they know that they will be in time and they have no queues to consider really. Of course, the preliminary results show that electric vehicles are critical for be able to have this low noise situation. We can also see that the delivery noise is critical, and you will hear much more about that from our friends at Colruyt, how that can be handled. One thing that is still need to be looked at is, of course, the incentives for the recipients who needs to, today at least, to have personnel at night, and that might be a problem. So the link is not stronger than, the chain is not stronger than the weakest link. So it's just one part of the system. But that part, for example, is quite, these tests show that it's a battery electric or plug-in hybrid electric with a geofence is really a necessity for a successful off-peak delivery at night time. And with that, I say thank you very much, and I will give the floor back to you.
Let me use the same words. Thank you very much, Mr. Blinge. Connection was not always too strong, so here and there we lost you, but the most important thing is that your amazing results came through very clear. So super to hear what you have been doing there. In Belgium as well, some people are ready to present you the results of the tests they have been doing on silent deliveries, linked to the legislation, and also to stress out some of the difficulties they experienced during the process. Ladies and gentlemen, for you, the logistic expert of Colruyt Group, that's Dries Roelens.
Thank you, Koen. My name is Dries Roelens, and as a project manager at Colruyt, me and the project team were responsible for covering the question you see on the screen, on the slides, how to make a delivery really silent. Before attempting to answer this question, it may be appropriate to gain a little insight into the problems we as Colruyt Group have to deal with on a daily basis when unloading and loading in an urban environment. So this problem becomes immediately clear, in fact, when we take a closer look at the test stores which were selected within the ZEUS project. The first test store which was selected within ZEUS was Colruyt Jette. And as deliveries there take place in the open air, it in fact represents more of the half of the other Colruyt stores in which we have more or less the same context. Since deliveries take place there at approximately 10 meters of the nearest neighbor, you can see at the moment we only have a limited delivery window there, which allows us at the moment to deliver between 7 and 21. Another store which was used within the ZEUS project is Colruyt Jourdan. Since there is a tendency among local authorities to allow the construction of a new store or the renovation of an existing store only if that store is integrated in a multi-purpose construction project. It was obvious for us that we also needed to include such a store, in this case Colruyt Jourdan, in the ZEUS project. So deliveries there happen through a fully covered indoor unloading quay, which is covered from the street through by means of a gate. But of course we have private residency just above the fully indoor unloading dock, which means there's also there a real chance of noise nuisance for the nearest neighbors, in fact. Now that we have a close look on the test sites we used within the ZEUS project, we'll go through the materials which we have tested, and specifically regarding these materials, we turned to other industries. So in fact, we didn't look at solutions which were already on the market for a retail within a retail context, but we really we turned to other industries. For example, we turned to the chemical industry, which happens to produce coatings, for example, coatings which are for the moment mainly used in underground parking lots. We also turned to construction industry, specifically for the sound screens. I'll go a bit more into detail during the next slides. And even we turned to the shipping industry to use some fenders within the loading and unloading activities at Colruyt Group. In the middle of the screen, you see that all those solutions were eventually integrated within the retail context of Colruyt. So within the loading and unloading process specifically at Colruyt. For example, they were also combined with silent trailers, which we were already using in the past. So the coating, for example, was implemented on the top side and the bottom side of the tailgate of two of our trucks. And of course, the ultimate objective of those measures is to result in reduced noise during off-peak hours in order to ensure the good night's rest of the local residents. I'll go quickly through some of the solutions. For example, on this screen you see the polyurea coating, which was not only applied at the trucks, at the tailgate of the trucks, as you see in the middle of the screen, but also on each of our loading and unloading infrastructures. On the left-hand side, you see the loading and unloading infrastructure at Jette, and on the right-hand side, you see the covering of the lifting table we have at Colruyt Jourdan. As was already mentioned, we also used some sound barriers or sound screens. Different types of them can be seen on the slideshow for the moment. On the left-hand side, you see the sound-absorbing panels, which are momently used in construction sites for the enclosements of motor or soundproof compressors. Sorry. In the middle of the screen, you see the mobile sound screens, which we used in Colruyt Jette. Those are screens which are used in order to cover, for example, construction sites or even festival grounds at the moment. So we use them within a Colruyt context to reduce the noise for the nearest neighbors at Colruyt Jette. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the sound-absorbing walls, which are currently mainly used within highway and railway contexts. In order to, again, reduce a noise-reducing effect for the nearest neighbors. And last but not least, we also did used some fenders, or did some testing on fenders. This, I have to admit, at first time they seem like your ordinary rubber bumpers. But in fact, these are fenders that are being used in shipping docks, because we already saw during previous projects at Colruyt Group that the rubber fenders, which I came to mention, are not always durable enough to be able to use it within a Colruyt context, which has heavy contacts with hand pallet trucks and retail carriers. The main objective for during the project was to have to be able to measure the sound reducing effect of each individual solution we have tested. So this has been accepted as a sort of an acoustical assessment, but also every possible combination of the mentioned solutions has been tested within the ZEUS project. And for that, we focused on the two main critical points during loading and unloading operations, being the loading and unloading of the truck itself, specifically the passing of the tailgate with a combination of a hand pallet truck and your retail carriers, and also the unloading and the uncoupling and the coupling of those retail carriers in the return freight zone at our stores. And of course, we did some baseline tests in the first phase, and on the second and the third phase, you see that we managed to uncouple the infrastructural adaptations from the adaptations to our rolling materials. So we did test them separately during the second and the third phase of the project. And only in the fourth phase of the project, we tested all of those solutions in one single testing environment. Again, which should allow us to measure the sound reducing effect of all materials apart. Last but not least, which are the preliminary conclusions for the moment? It's very important to have a clear view on the problems you want to tackle within a loading and unloading environment in a city context. So you have to be very well aware of the choice you make for sound reducing materials. The second one is a result of the first one, in fact, as it has been concluded within the project that a mere accumulation of sound reducing measures is not always resulting in the highest noise reduction. For example, if you put a coating on the loading unloading floor and you put one on the bottom side and the top side of your tailgate of the truck, you have in fact a higher, this results in a higher noise level than before, or even with one of those measures separately. Also very important, if you are not able to tackle the noise directly at the source itself, it's very important to tackle the noise as closely to the source as possible. So that is also one of the conclusions we have and resulting from several tests with the sound screens in Jette. And of course, specifically also in a Colruyt context, it's very important to do further research regarding the durability and the wear and tear resistance regarding the use of those materials, of course, which is not always as easy to do this kind of evaluation during a 1 year testing period. So I'll give the floor to Shari.
It looks like I'm Shari, but I have to disappoint you. Shari will be the next person. Just going to announce her properly in the way that I'm very honored to have a PhD researcher of the University of Brussels amongst us as well. She knows all on the added value of stakeholder analysis and how their tool, MAMCA, can help with this process. Mr. Heunings, the floor is yours. Mrs., of course. Did I say Mr.? It will be quite sure that it's not Mr., it's Mrs.
Okay, thank you, Koen. All right, let's dive into the social aspect then, because that's a task that was assigned to the Brussels University. When we take a look at all the tests that are being performed and all the models that are being set up, we see that each of these tests focuses on one of the components of a measure. For example, what is the effect on congestion? What is the effect on costs, on emissions reduction, etc. Now, what we do as VUB, we have developed a methodology called MAMCA that brings all these components together and also adds a social aspect. It looks at what is important for each of the people that are impacted by these measures, which of these components is the most important for them. Why is this important overall? Well, because in order for a measurement or for a measure to be successfully implemented, you need the support of everyone who is affected by the measure. We have ample examples of nice development projects that looked very good on paper, but were never realized on site because of protests from neighborhoods. One very classic example is the development of noise walls, for example. On paper, it looks very good because noise is reduced significantly, but we see that when these noise walls are actually put up, a lot of the neighbors protest against them because they think that the visual nuisance that they bring is much more important and has a lot bigger negative influence on their lives than the noise had. So it's very important to take into account the interests and the needs of everyone who is affected and look at all the components together. And that's exactly what our tool does. So MAMCA is short for multi-actor, multi-criteria analysis. That's a mouthful, but basically what it does is in situations where you have a lot of different solutions, but also a lot of different people that are impacted and have their own needs and interests, well, this methodology brings them together and starts looking for a solution that can be supported by everyone. There are basically 5 main steps within this methodology, and the result is a nice graph of that shows all the different solutions and which one of these solutions is preferred by each stakeholder. And with this graph, you can start discussions with everyone and try to reach a consensus. Let's take a deeper look at all these different steps. Well, the first one is the scenario building, like looking for the solutions. What do we want to research within our project? For ZEUS, we discovered that there are 4 main questions that can be asked, and that can be a part of these scenarios. The 4 main questions for city deliveries are what delivery route are we going to use? What type of vehicle should be used? What type of equipment? And the 4th one is what delivery times can we use? For example, if you say we want to have less emissions and more silent deliveries, but we don't want to make any investments in our vehicles and our equipment, you can build some scenarios where you take a look at different types of routes, different types of delivery times, and you combine them. You have, for example, a scenario with a long route that impacts less people and delivers at midnight, and another scenario is the exact same long route but with deliveries during daytime, etc. So those are the scenarios. Second step is identify the stakeholders. With all these solutions that you just built, who is impacted the most and who should have a say in the end results. Typically for projects like ZEUS, those are local authorities, citizens, shop holders, environmentalists, etc. Those are the stakeholder groups. A third step is the evaluation of these stakeholders and their priorities. What are their needs and their interests? And for that, we build a survey where we ask the question, what do you find as a specific stakeholder important in city deliveries? And we have a whole lot of options from which they can choose, or they can add their own. For example, is it that the noise is reduced? Is it emissions that you find very important, that those are reduced? Is it maybe the cost of the delivery that should be low? Is it safety, etc.? So each of these stakeholders can choose the most relevant objectives for them. In a first step, in a second step, we offer them our online tool and they can add a weight to each of these selected objectives. And this weight is in accordance to the importance they attach to that specific objective, because each objective is still on a different level for them in terms of importance. So once we know all that, we know the scenarios, we know what they find important, then we can go and evaluate all these different scenarios. And how do we do that? Well, there's 2 ways to do this. The first one is we let the stakeholders themselves do the evaluation. For each of the scenarios, they have to attribute a score to the scenarios based on their objectives. How does scenario A score on my objective B, on my objective C, etc. And that gives us like a resulting graph. I will go more into detail later, but just to show it, that looks like this. And these graphs show for each of the stakeholders which is a preferred solution, preferred scenario based on my objectives. I told you there are 2 ways to do this. This first one is you let the stakeholders evaluate it themselves. The second one is you use models or data input you get from test cases to actually do the evaluation on a more scientifically or a more mathematical basis. So to make it a bit more clear, we tested this out for the Colruyt case that Dries just explained. And we went through all the steps for one of the cases from Colruyt. First one, the scenario building. We asked ourselves the questions, what is important? What do we want to test out in this case? And here it was, we want to see what's the stakeholder acceptance for the use of silent equipment in two different contexts, Jette et Jourdan, with an uncovered bay and a covered bay, and also of the extension of the delivery window. And it gave us 5 different scenarios. The first one is the business as usual, which is, let's say we do nothing, we just keep on going as we do today for comparison reasons. Then we have 2 scenarios with an extended delivery window, but only by an hour, like deliveries until 10 o'clock at night in the 2 different contexts with an uncovered bay and a covered bay. The next 2 scenarios are a much more extended delivery window until midnight, again with an uncovered and a covered bay. So those are the 5 scenarios. Then we took a look at who will be impacted the most by these measures and who should we include in our process. And then we found 4 stakeholder groups. We found the retailer Colruyt itself, logistics service provider, the citizens of the nearby shop, like the neighborhood citizens, and then we had the local government of the municipality itself. We asked them to send a representative to a MAMCA workshop that we did. They could beforehand discuss it among them or with their colleagues what was important for them, but we asked them to send 1 representative to the MAMCA workshop. What did they do? First of all, they had to indicate which objectives are the most important for them, and they filled out the survey. And they also attributed a weight to the selected objectives, and this is the result of this weighing process. I'm not going to go into detail for all the results, but maybe take a look at the neighborhood citizens who are on the right below. They only selected 4 important objectives, namely noise reduction was the most important, but it had the same weight as disturbance of urban life, which means congestion and also visual nuisance. So those 2 are very important for them. There's also emissions reduction that they find important with the new measures, and safety. When we take a look, for example, at the logistics service provider, we see that safety is really a critical aspect. If the new measures can't guarantee that safety will improve, then it will probably not be supported by this logistics service provider. Next step was that we let them evaluate the different scenarios. So using our MAMCA tool, you get to see a window with a scale. So for each of the selected objectives, in this case, for example, noise reduction, the stakeholders had to indicate how it scores on a scale from 1 to 10 for each of the scenarios. Business as usual was scored a 5, and then you take a look at the different scenarios. Does it score better on noise reduction or worse than the business as usual? When you do this for each of the selected objectives, you get a resulting graph. This one is for the retailer, where we see in the end result, maybe to start with, the colored curves represent a certain scenario, and on the bottom here we have the different objectives, and we see how each of the scenarios scores on each of the objectives. This is the resulting score, where we see that the green and the orange ones score best for retailer Colruyt, and those are the ones with the most extended delivery window. How come? Well, we see, for example, that these 2 scenarios score very well on the objectives duration of the tour and flexibility, and therefore create a good end result. Why is that they score good on that? Because, well, if your delivery window is larger, you have a more flexible schedule, you can avoid congestions more, etc. The only aspect on which it scores less than the business as usual scenario, which is the red one, is noise reduction. So this is done by the stakeholders themselves, but once we get all the test results in and all the models are ready, we can do this scoring based on those things. So for example, the objectives noise reduction, low-cost deliveries, emissions reduction, etc., can be actually evaluated based on the models that we have. Now, we've done this for each of the stakeholders. We've taken these results, and that gives us an end result where we can see, again, in the colored lines, the different scenarios, and on the bottom, we see the different stakeholders. This is their result. First of all, we see that there's not one scenario that scores best for all the stakeholders. There's a lot of difference. What we do see is that the covered versus uncovered bay also gives a different result. For example, the green and the orange one. The green is the covered bay and the orange the uncovered bay. With the blue ones, the light blue is the covered and the dark blue is the uncovered bay. We see that the acceptance is a little bit higher for cases where you work with a covered bay. And then we see that for the retailer and the logistics service provider, there's a clear preference for the extended delivery window, where that is the least preferred option for the municipality and for the neighborhood citizens. Now, we talked about this with them. We went into detail to see where does this result come from. And then we see that actually this most extended window scenario scores best on things like emission, on congestion, on safety, etc., which is also important for them. But the only reason why it scores less overall is because of the noise. So we know beforehand for this project, those two said, no, we can't support the extended window of delivery. But by looking into the details, we saw that they saw, oh, it also has some advantages, this extended window. The only problem we have is probably with the noise. And the way we perceive it now is that these will produce a lot more noise. So if the tests can show that the extra noise production, in fact, is limited, then they could support this scenario. Or when it shows that there is indeed an extra noise production, the only way for them to support an extended delivery window is when added measures are taken to reduce this noise. But yeah, that's basically the first conclusion that we have for now. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Miss Heunings. And sorry again, I said Mr. Quite bizarre. Okay, before tackling some of the questions that you sent me already, there's one last presentation of today. The impact assessment and modeling for multi-actor, multi-criteria decision-making. A mouthful, as it says. I've been studying on the name of the person who would do the presentation, Mr. Guido Falvi. And then this morning I heard that he could not make it. So right now I'm going to take you to Germany, where Mr. Volker Kraft will take the word, and he will do the final presentation of today before we will give you some answers on the questions you have sent us already. Mr. Kraft, the floor is yours.
Koen, thanks. Thank you very much for introduction. Yes, you can see I stepped out with you. No, the weather is not that fine in Dortmund today, but hopefully ZEUS can give a tiny contribution to keep sky in the cities that blue. So as announced, the final part will be to have a final look at the models and methods that have been used in ZEUS project to make this assessment of impact and to model this multi-actor, multi-criteria decision-making. There were three institutions involved, namely University of Tartu, KTH from Stockholm, and Fraunhofer IML in Germany, Dortmund. Next slide, please. So, as you can imagine by the number of participants, there was a lot of input and a lot of abilities given, but Corely, the intention was that there is a specific need to have a lot of support, technical support in manifold ways for decision making, implementation and evaluation for concepts like ZEUS. Therefore, as you can see, there are a lot of different aspects. For example, the way of how to do the traffic and how traffic impacts on such concepts, how the noise is affecting the delivery transports to cities, how it can be done in a more silent way, or how that it can be validated and implemented by giving a business model for such an approach. Next, please. So we have done this by doing ongoing process and iterating process of selecting models, deploying them for the use of those, collaborating them, integrating them with each other, and refining them, and have done it until in the end we got a complete view on it. And in the end, we have combined a variety of different models and methods with the objective to support these activities in a comprehensive way. And next slide, please. And by this, we developed different KPIs with regard to emissions, cost, sustainability, and on the other hand, also different activities on decision making by delivering input for these decision-making processes, like the one presented by Sherry before, or like the activity of business canvas modeling. Next, please. Just a short look on it. There were, as announced, a lot of different models that have been brought together within ZEUS with their specific advantages and their specific outcomes. So in the end, there was a large variety of answers that can be given by the different models, and for sure, and especially by this holistic approach that can be reached with the use of these models for the use. Next, please. So in the following, I'm going to present shortly, with regard to limited time, the different models that are in charge here. The first one, and it's quite fundamental and basic, it's the traffic model. The model collects information on how traffic is going, where are congestions in the cities, and by doing this and getting information from different sources, there can be given twofold information. On the one hand, on the microscopic level, it can be set for individual routes where they are best and how they are realized with regard to traffic, and moreover, with regard to macroscopic level, traffic flows are shown in a comprehensive way, and so an urban area can be classified totally by this information, and this information can be used by other models that are depending on information regarding specific information how traffic flow and traffic density is. Next slide, please. This can be done over the course of the day, and therefore there is quite specific information, as you see at the figure on the left. It's not just average speed for a day. It's specific, and with specific regard to the approach of night or off-peak delivery. It's important to know how traffic situation is at that time. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see two different kind of outputs that are generated by this model. So on the one hand, for street level wise, you can see the density at a certain point of time, and on the other side, on the right side, you see how a route is performed with regard to the specific information of density and how efficient it can be done with regard to this density. Next slide, please. The second known model was the noise model or noise measurement model. In fact, and this was announced by Magnus earlier, we collected information on noise on the one hand specific to the vehicles, and on the other hand according to the locations, and we have done this in Stockholm and Brussels. The colleagues of KTH have done this in Stockholm and Brussels for the locations, and in Stockholm and Munich for the vehicles. And by this, they collected a comprehensive view on the situation regarding noise. And as you can see in the figure, these noise levels are overlapping and in the end influencing each other with regard to the activities when unloading at a certain location. Next, please. And it's a quite important and valuable output and outcome of the noise model that we can have a close view on sensitivity with regard to influence of noise over a city. On the right side, you see it for Stockholm. And moreover, you can see that you can have a look on close effects of trucks and their routes through the city. As you can see, a day diesel vehicle has not that much influence, but this is depending on the way that there are a lot of other cars and vehicles going around. At nighttime, the specific outcome with regard to noise of such a vehicle is much higher. And we've compared it, that's the lowest picture, with a hybrid truck. There's much less influence on noise than with a diesel truck at night. Next slide, please. The third model to have a look on is the transport efficiency model. With this model, an assessment of effects with regard to duration of routes, best taken routes, fuel consumption, etc., can be done and evaluated in manifold ways. And this has been done especially for Stockholm and the case Magnus described in the beginning, the deliveries to Harvey, to McDonald's locations done by Harvey, and with the model, different alternatives could be taken. Next slide, please. So in the end, this transport efficiency model presents a lot of assessments, and by this, different kind of transports can be validated and compared with the other, and the most effective way can be shown with regard to the Harvey McDonald's case. It could be shown that there are a lot of improvements that can be done, and just under certain specific conditions, there may be no efficient way to do off-peak delivery, but mostly there are a lot of effects in positive ways, and even effects of a city change in street use could be shown by this model. Next, please. So just a rough step through different scenarios. You can just step on. So thank you. As I said before, there were a lot of analysis and a lot of comparisons over the day, over the night. Sorry, it was night delivery. With regard to the effects, and most time, and you see the green numbers in the figure, have shown that there is positive effect, and just as said, under specific conditions, the effects with regard to all these different aspects that have been covered by assessment are worse, but in the end, it's a valid contribution to do a decision making and get valuable KPIs for further models. Next, please. The fourth model, and yes, thanks for stepping, and just one more click. So silent routing is especially having a look on how to do routing with regard to avoidance of disturbance. So on the one hand, specific facilities like kindergarten, hospitals, schools, etc., shall be avoided. But on the other hand, and this is a valid input of the noise model with regard to noise levels and noise sensitivity, this routing is done. Next, please. Yes. And as you can see at the left picture, this has been also applied to Stockholm case 2 with regard to these Harvey McDonald's case, and to have a close look on which ways can be taken best for the routing within Stockholm in this case. And as you can see on the other two pictures with regard to Munich case, there have been done analysis by the silent routing, which ways can be taken with regard to effects on certain locations, like I said, in this case, the lower picture with hospitals. Next slide, please. For a very different model, and just a spotlight on it, we have also an off-peak macroscopic model for logistics. This can be used as an quite initial model to have a view on general effects for something like off-peak zero emission deliveries. And with regard to all the flows within a city and transports within a city, effects can be measured and characteristified by such a model. So like I said, this is quite an initial step for make a decision whether it can be, in general, be sensible to do such a project like off-peak delivery. Next, please. And this we can step over. Thanks. And last model to present within this slideshow is a business model. As you can see there, there's a canvas, and this has been applied for these two to see what effects are and how different players of the appliance of such model will having a right use of the off-peak delivery approach. And as you can see here, for the view of a transport buyer, there are a lot of positive effects, and based on these effects and this validation done with this business model canvas, the decision making in the end can have a valuable base and can be done in a specific way. And like presented by Sherry, the MAMCA tool is also a very important step in this whole scenario of different models. Impacts of business model are short-term, that there are some revenues, but the cost structure will be impacted in a negative way, in a way. But in the end, there are a lot of positive effects and KPIs that can be shown that have positive effects on the outcome of such a transfer of a transport buyer with regard to off-peak deliveries like done in the US. Next slide, please. Finally, in the end, as shown with a view on these different models, there's a lot of impact that can be realized by applying such a manifold way of models. They can definitely assist in decision-making process, in planning and in implementation for projects like ZEUS. And more enhanced, they can build a toolbox that can be used for measuring, planning, and evaluation of such projects in general. And by this, they help, or it can help to guarantee the compliance and sustainability of any urban delivery transport concept, and therefore we are going to implement it further on. Thank you very much. That was my contribution.
Thank you very much. Let's use the last 10 minutes of this being together to answer some questions, some Q&A that we are going to do right now. As you might notice, we put a screen here because I'm going to invite some of the persons who are here live to join me to answer a question. Dries, maybe you can join me because there's one question or two questions for you. First of all, I wrote them down. Do you think the tested measures and materials can be easily implemented in unloading and loading activities of other companies as well?
Well, I think none of the solutions I came to mention in the presentation were developed or produced exclusively for Colruyt Group or for the ZEUS project as a matter. So I think most of the solutions are perfectly applicable in other contexts. We have the advantage at Colruyt that the rolling materials and the infrastructure are property of Colruyt Group. So that gives us an advantage, especially the latter one. So you, in for example, a city context, you will need the support of the city to put a coating on the floor. That's quite logic. But none of the materials are specifically developed for Colruyt.
No. Okay, thanks very much. Second question for you. Do your preliminary findings show one combination of noise-reducing measures as the most optimal?
I don't think there's a miracle solution or a one-fits-all solution. I think, as I mentioned, a lot depends on the situational context of each delivery zone. I think, for example, if you put a coating on the floor of your loading zone, it's not necessary to put a coating on the tailgate. So that are important conclusions. But it's not that now we see already that there's a one-fits-all solution. That is the miracle solution within the ZEUS project.
Okay. Thanks very much. From behind the screen. A little bit strange to talk with each other like this. Okay, I'm going to invite Shari here as well, because one question came in for you as well. How can you use MAMCA with stakeholder groups that are large and whose representatives you all want to engage in the process? For example, a neighborhood committee with many active members.
Yeah, that's a good question, because for every stakeholder group at the moment, there's only one set of objectives that we can use. And up until now, it's only one representative of that group that delivers us the input, or sometimes we organize a workshop with a couple of representatives, and then they decide among each other what answer they are going to give to us. But we know that has some limitations, as you mentioned, for large citizen groups. So that's why we developed a new MAMCA feature this year that allows to send out digitally this questionnaire to everyone you want to have involved. And our software automatically captures all these answers and makes it into one answer that's more representative of this whole group, so everyone gets their say or their input for this.
Yeah, and they have the feeling they're really involved. I guess that's quite important.
Yes, indeed, because I think if you organize a workshop, not everyone is as inclined as the others to speak up or to say what they actually want. And I think with this measure, you can take into account indeed everyone's opinion on the same level. Everyone is as important as the other one within their group. So.
Okay, thanks very much. That's a really clear answer. Thanks, Shari. There's one or two questions maybe for Mr. Blinge, so we're going to come back to you, Mr. Blinge. I'm going to read out. Silent vehicles seem like the ultimate solution for off-peak deliveries, at least when they are driving on the road. The question remains, what is keeping us from implementing it in all cities? What's the roadblock there?
Yeah, thank you. You have to see this as a system perspective, a system solution. So just finding a silent vehicle or silent material is not everything. And this is a chain, this is a supply chain, and no chain is stronger than the weakest link. So it's a lot of other things that needs to be considered. Many stakeholders in this chain as well. So Looking, for example, for as Robin Billsjö said, in the city, the permits that it's in place. It's not enough just to have temporary permits. You have allow this kind of vehicles in the night and in sensitive areas. Of course, if they are silent and emission free from the tailpipe. Of course, also the driver is important. The driver behavior, that you don't have music on and you don't slam the doors and stuff like that. It's easy to forget these kind of things. That is quite easy, but still. And then, of course, from a vehicle OEM, vehicle producers' perspective and our customers, it's of course these trucks are more expensive. The batteries are expensive, and the more batteries there are, the more expensive is the vehicle. And for example, a fully battery electric vehicles with a lot of batteries that really puts pressure on the transport operators to run almost 24/7, as the fuel is cheap, the electricity, but the vehicle is costly. So this is a trade-off between operation and total cost of ownership, how much batteries you want it. So is it a full electric or is it a plug-in battery with 40 kilometers range or 10 kilometers? So you have to look at the transport operators' business model. And also, of course, the recipients. Why should they have someone there in the middle of the night? And how pleasant is it to work at 2 o'clock just to receive some goods? And what is this person? There have been some insights from McDonald's that they don't like working there because it's difficult to get home, because there are no, if they don't own a car, how should they get to home? It's not public transport everywhere in the middle of the night. So looking at the whole perspective is really important.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you very much. There's another question for you, I think. Could it be that urban logistics transport technology design is too vehicle-centric compared to load carrier and container design and ecosystem development? The person who asked the question gave another example. By comparison, he said multimodal and universal sea container and its surfaces versus the ship design and the standardization in the past.
That's a very good question and a good insight, because that's absolutely true. And it has been too much focus on the vehicles, really. The boxes, the pallets, this system must be much more smooth, and you have a lot of efficiency in that part. And we are actually in the phase of having such a project in Stockholm as well. So that's a very, very good question, and it's something that we should look much more in detail in the future, because the vehicles are ready. So now it's the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Blinge. Last question for our last presenter of today, Mr. Kraft. One more time, putting on your sound to answer this question maybe. What business opportunities do you see for the models of ZEUS?
Yes, I think this has to be answered threefold. So, as shown in the first glance, it's short term, so we can deliver the with this case or with the number of methods combined in a holistic way that we can support decision making to individual cities with regard to impacts for projects like ZEUS. Then the midterm, it should help to be able, in a more generalized way, to measure and monitor and especially verify the compliance and, as I said before, sustainability of such approaches, but also similar approaches to come to an upper level. And in the long term, with an enhancement of such approaches, for example, with artificial intelligence, it can maybe help to do something like dynamic control and optimized contribution for any approach within urban deliveries, that these models, like I said, can build a toolbox that can be used in a very specific way for different ways of application.
Okay, thank you very much. If you saw me looking at my left, it was because I was asking Jonas if we could end this session. Yes, he nodded. So we're at the end of the presentations. No further questions have entered. So only thing for me to do is to thank you to be here to join us during this 1 hour and a half presentation on this super interesting project, of which I suppose we will hear much more in the future. I wish you a pleasant day, already fine holidays, and maybe we'll see each other some other time. Bye bye.